the issues there with that and the production value, but it will get better. It will get better. But yeah, I appreciate the comment. Appreciate the comment. Much love. But we're still talking about New Caledonia and the referendum. What in the world is Emmanuel Macron thinking? Just lacking in integrity, going on television saying they won the election when the independence parties all stayed home. So we were talking about the backlash in the Pacific region with the Melanesian Spearhead group supporting the independence camps and the other Pacific Forum supporting it. The independence groups are just saying, hey, the referendum's null and void. It's null and void, and we will continue with our independence plan, whatever it costs, is the quote coming out of the independence camp. So let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about this French settler colonialism taking place in New Caledonia in 2021. This is not 1962. This is 2021. So let me know what you think. The Pacific Forum and the Melanesian Spearhead Group are saying that the referendum and the French actions are in violation of Article 1 of the UN Charter, dealing with self-determination, as well as General Assembly Resolution 1514, going way back to December 14th, 1960, which is a resolution on the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. Yeah, it's a sad situation. Scotland, if we go all the way over to Scotland, and the National, they came up with a statement in the National of Scotland on December 17th, and it read, "The result of the independence referendum in New Caledonia shows the perils of manipulation of democratic processes. It was held against the better judgment of the independence-supporting National Liberation Front because of the COVID emergency, and local funeral customs would make campaigning impossible. The French government insisted that it should go ahead to complete the three-part referendum Noumea Agreement of 1998. The National of Scotland on December 17 continues and says the French government's manipulation carries lessons for us, both in the possible use of such tactics by the UK government and those amongst us who are impatient to hold a vote in circumstances where widespread campaigning is impossible." From the National Scotland. They also say abstention levels called for by the NLF were 56.13%. Non-participation by one camp completely invalidates the result. Coming out of Scotland. They're right. They're right. How can you have 56% stay home on purpose? The Independence Party stay home on purpose and claim victory that New Caledonia massively went for staying with France, according to Macron. That's absurd. That's absurd. And any logically thinking person knows it's absurd, including Jean-Luc Mélenchon of the France Unbowed La France Insoumise Party, who said the government had destroyed the consensus process of the 1998 Noumea Accord by imposing a referendum date and triggering a huge abstention by the pro-independence side. He said he now hoped that Macron's government would not go from what he described as one brutality to the next, and warned against imposing change. Mélenchon said Macron was wrong to claim right after the plebiscite that the accord was no longer legally valid. He says, "We are now in what is being considered a conflict zone by the Anglo-Saxon alliance of New Zealanders, Americans, and Australians. If the French government thought it could get rid of a problem by being more present and quicker in the Cold War it wants to have with China, it has made a big mistake." Mélenchon He also said the current statute of New Caledonia is in the French Constitution. It cannot be changed without changing the Constitution. Therefore, the territory's government and assembly remain legitimate institutions. He said that the actions by the French government imposing this referendum against the wishes of the Kanak people took the situation back 30 years to the 1980s when there was militancy and violent militants fighting against the French colonial rule. So Mélenchon's saying it's taken the process all the way back, pretty much destroyed the last 30 years. That's what he's saying. It's destroyed the last 30 years, and he's not the only one. He's not the only one. The Kanaks are saying that. There's the Australian Strategic Institute in their blog, The Strategist. They're saying something similar. They're saying now violence can't be ruled out, that it was only 12 months ago that a $1 billion nickel plant in the South Province had burning buildings and vehicles and Molotov cocktails being thrown at it from those that were tired of being ruled on by a colonial overlord. And the Strategic Policy Institute also says more broadly, Pacific leaders will at the least be asking themselves whether France is serious in its efforts to be a responsible Indo-Pacific partner, when it seems to be treating the critical final vote ending a 30-year process so extensively boycotted by indigenous independent supporters as showing massive support for France. That's Denise Fisher at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. She served as the Australian Consul General in Namibia, Australian High Commissioner in Harare, and political counselor at the Australian Embassy in Washington, also a visiting fellow at the Australian National University Centre for European Studies, and author of a number of books. But that's coming from a lot of different angles, from the Pacific leaders, from Australia, from the region, from Scotland, from the French left. And the Kanak leaders flew to New York to meet with the United Nations, and they're asking the United Nations to invalidate this referendum, and they already have declared the independence parties that it's null and void. They're not recognizing it. I don't see how anybody with a democratic bone, small d democratic bone in their body, could recognize a referendum under the circumstances that we discussed on Monday and that resulted in a massive boycott. It just shows a lack of respect. It shows a lack of respect, a cultural respect. It's like this Eurocentric, French-centric superiority. And that was shown in the racist cartoons. That was shown in the racist cartoons that the independence camps appealed to have removed, where they showed the Kanaks as less than and childlike, and we talked about that in previous streams. But it's an arrogance. It's an arrogance. And I lived in France, and France has many beautiful things about it. A lot of countries have beautiful things about it, about their cultures. If you're looking for beauty, you can find the beauty. And so to see the French right, it's usually the French right. I'm totally against stereotyping. But you can see it coming from the French right and the far right, with that old colonial mentality. That the French, it's in the language that they must speak French perfectly, and put down the Kanaks for their accent, or their make them look like they're children with in their cartoons that they put out there with children's voices, while the loyalists had sophisticated, articulate French. This is the old colonial mentality, and the sad thing is, I mean, there are people, you can't change their mentality. If they want to put on an air of superiority or some sort, that's to their impoverishment, because when you have that kind of ego mentality that I'm better than, my culture is better than yours, or you're not really happy. You can't be a happy person, because you're looking down at others, and that's not where true happiness comes comes from. True happiness comes from gratitude and recognizing the divinity, the spirituality, the humanity, the dignity in everybody. And to feel superior, whether it's white supremacy or cultural superiority, to feel any kind of superiority, you're really reflecting your own insecurity. You're really reflecting your own lack of sureness, because you want to constantly say you're better than. And I see a lot of that, especially in this situation, because they're dominating over a people. They're using advertisements within the campaign process to denigrate people. The ads are clearly racist. They're refusing to respect the cultural traditions when the independence camps clearly stated that it is against, we cannot go forward with this referendum. It was imposed on them. We cannot go through with this referendum. Why? Because we have an extended mourning. We've been hit with COVID. We're in crisis. And we're mourning our victims, almost 300 people. And so they asked, and it's ignored. And what does that say? That's like when you ignore another's cultural, it's not like it, and they were just asking it for August 2022. That could be done. That's not an unreasonable request. It's not. It's not like they asked something that's so unreasonable that's, oh, we have to, move your entire naval base or something that couldn't be done, that was outrageously, like an outrageous request. To postpone a referendum and ask for it months in advance because the Delta variant had hit, and they have cultural reasons for doing it, specific cultural reasons during their mourning period, it wasn't respected. As if, okay, in France, we don't do that. We don't have this kind of extended mourning period, so it doesn't matter. We're going to go right ahead and just ignore it and then have a referendum without you. But that goes back to the history. That goes back to the history of the colonial mentality. It almost validates the reasons for independence. It almost demonstrates to the entire world, anybody that's paying attention to the situation, why the Kanak need their independence. If the French government had said, okay, we understand that this is a tough time. It's a tough time the world over. But we understand culturally you can't participate in the referendum right now. You also can't campaign because you can't hold any rallies. There's restrictions, and it's not fair. It's not fair because that's how you get out to vote, to stimulate and to garner your support base to get out to vote by having rallies. That's what you did in 2018. That's what you did in 2020. So if the French government had said, we understand this and we're going to postpone until 2022. They were close in 2018 and 2020, and we're going to have a fair and just referendum. And whoever wins when the conditions are fair and you're able to participate, then that will be the result, and it should be respected by all parties. And then they'll move forward to the next stage. Right now, the Kanaks are saying that they're not even willing to talk with the French government about they're not willing to talk about next steps. They're not willing to talk about next steps. Independence parties united as never before in a strategy committed, including trade unions and customary elders, reacted strongly. The committee denied the validity of the vote, which had said it was against the spirit and letter of the Noumea Accord, the decolonization process, and UN resolutions. It said independence parties would not participate in discussions until after next year's French national elections. Party leader Roch Wamitan had presented their case for postponement to the UN just days before the vote and has since described the outcome as null and void. And another party leader, Charles Washington, said parties would contest the result in the region and internationally and would never discuss, this is strong, would never discuss yet another agreement on a statute within the French Republic and would proceed with their independence plans whatever it costs. Whatever it costs. And so those are strong words, and you can see the trust has been broken. That's what Mélenchon is saying. That's what a number of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute is saying. They're saying independence parties aren't in a hurry. They're not going anywhere. Kanaks aren't going anywhere. And that Pacific leaders will at least be asking themselves whether France is serious in its efforts to be a responsible Indo-Pacific partner, when it seems to be treating the critical final vote ending a 30-year process so extensively boycotted by indigenous independence supporters as showing massive support. And that's referring to Emmanuel Macron, who said that New Caledonians had massively pronounced against the acceding to full sovereignty and independence. And in a context of strong abstention, he said the majority of Caledonians had, quote, freely decided to stay within the Republic, making France the more beautiful. He said the Numi Accord had legally expired and foreshadowed discussions to build a common destiny in this Indo-Pacific region in full reconstruction and subject to major tensions and to face the challenges in the Pacific Ocean, which is an integral part of our national space. Why is it an integral part of your national space, Macron? It's 17,000 kilometers from France. It's 17,000 kilometers, just under 17,000 kilometers from France. You have no business ruling over New Caledonia. Just because you imported settlers for decades after decades, going back when you stole their land, you imported and you imported colonial settlers and labor into New Caledonia, and you think it's your space. It's not your space, and that's what the Kanak people are saying. It's not. You're a colonial occupier. And it's sad if you look at the history. It's a brutal history. And Mélenchon, is the one, in France that's speaking with integrity. With integrity. So he's where did Mélenchon's statement go? Here we go. I think we already read this, but he said, "I hope the government doesn't jump from one brutality to the next." Anyway, we're going to keep our eye on this situation. We're going to keep streaming, keep talking about this, and I want to hear what you have to say. This is an inspiring situation from the point of the Kanak people being unified and rising up against colonial domination. And that is not an overstatement to say it's a colonial domination, that they're a colonizer. This is just not some kind of rhetorical choice of words to exaggerate the situation. Go to Ion Global Politics Twitter account and check out the article "New Caledonia Referendum: France's Last Pocket of Settler Colonialism" by Joseph Massad, where he compares New Caledonia with the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And you look at the history, you look at the brutal history of the French in New Caledonia. There was a time before I was familiar with all the details, that because I had lived in France and went to grad school in France, that I thought about visiting New Caledonia. And then when I got further into the details, reading books about New Caledonia, looking at and then listening to the people of New Caledonia, watching documentaries about the history of it, I think there's a good documentary on YouTube about called "We Are Rebels," I believe. I refuse to go visit New Caledonia. I refuse to go because I don't want to support the French occupation of that land. It's such a bad history. I mean, there's other areas in the world that have bad histories, but it's one of those. It's such a bad history that I don't want any part in supporting that colonial domination. I will go visit New Caledonia when it becomes Kanaky, when it becomes an independent land. I will go there and visit. But I don't want to support colonial domination, so I scratched that off my list as far as travel destinations. So I hope everyone's having a wonderful Friday, and we'll continue to stream on this topic and discuss it. I want to hear your thoughts, your detailed ideas, what's on your mind, and keep the faith. Keep the faith.